I think one of the things that really jumps out in our readings today is that we often think we understand more than we do. And we often think that we understand how life works more than we do. Or that even, one might say, we think we understand how God ought to work and what he does. And once we've got it all figured out, then we just wash our hands and get on with life. That probably comes out most clearly in our first reading from 2 Kings, where Elisha has been prophesying and providing to the king a little bit of inside information on where the Arameans were moving. A little bit of inside information on what was going on. And the king of Aram says, who is this? Who is this that is giving away all the details of my army's movements? You know the rest because we read it. That there Elisha is at the house with his servant, and there is the army of Aram surrounding them, and the servant thinks that he understands, thinks that he knows, and he says, oh no, we are toast, we are dead meat, I can't get away from this one. And Elisha, by the power of God, Elisha prays, and God lets the servant see exactly what the reality is. That God reveals for this servant the exact spiritual reality that the Arameans were ignorant of. The godless, unbelieving Arameans did not know that a greater army of angels was surrounding Elisha. And God also opened for the eyes of that servant and unveiled for him exactly the sort of truth that the servant may have been a little bit too confident about in the first place, but now he sees reality. He had been so confident that his master, the prophet, was telling all the details and that everything was fine. And that's all well and good as long as the king stays over there and we are over here. As long as you just type out a quick email to the king of where not to go, then we'll be fine. But when the Arameans show up at your own doorstep with chariots and horses, the main battle tanks and the Bradley armored fighting vehicles of their day, surrounding your hut, your home, and then things are a little bit different. And then the reality of how things actually are in God's view and what is the spiritual reality comes true and becomes visible. Our second reading, Paul demonstrates that sort of confidence, and this, I suppose, is the reverse, where he talked about the fact that he knew he was going to be executed soon, and that as a Roman citizen, it meant the sword instead of the cross, which, comparatively speaking, is probably a good thing. But he doesn't talk with the dire downerness of, oh no, woe is me, and the last appeal has fallen through, but with the confidence of the Christian that says, I know what my God has in store for me. I know what my God has in store for me, and that is the crown of life, because he will take me from this vale of tears to himself in heaven, this actual place, heaven, where right now the souls of the departed saints, the believers, are with God, awaiting the day of resurrection. And then we get to our gospel reading, which is kind of suspended between the two. Jesus has been preparing his disciples for more ministry, and they're going to be going back across the lake to the exact place where just a chapter or two previously, Jesus had confronted this demon-possessed man, possessed by a legion of demons. The sort of man that he couldn't be bound with chains, that the zip ties of the U.S. Army or the handcuffs of the Toledo police wouldn't be able to restrain him in the least. They couldn't bind him, all they could do was hope for the best. And especially when confronting, in a very real way, confronting face-to-face the sort of evil, the sort of danger that spiritually demonic forces present, Jesus doesn't want his disciples to be afraid. Jesus doesn't want his disciples to be afraid. And so he had sent them across the lake while he dismissed the crowd so that the disciples wouldn't get any notions about making Jesus into a king. And then as the disciples start rowing their way across the lake, Jesus went up on the mountainside to pray for a while. Again, last week, the feeding of the 5,000, that where Christ is, there is no crisis. We hear today that they missed the point. And so Jesus has to teach the lesson again. Teach the lesson again as they are in the middle of the lake and they see this phantasm, this spirit apparently walking across the lake. Phantasm, that's the fun English word that we don't use very often. It's just a straight Greek word put into English letters. It's a phantom, they say. And do you notice the terror? That here they are rowing across the lake and the wind is against them, and it's not just, oh, they were afraid. And it's not just all of a surprise, oh, there's something over there. But this is the terror of men who had been raised in a superstitious setting, perhaps. The terror of those who knew the legends and the sea shanties that talked about the ghost ships and talked about all the bad things that ought to happen and all the good things that you ought to do if you want to have success and survive the sea. And they see this apparition. And the way that Mark describes it, he basically, as far as we can tell, basically takes Peter's words, where Peter's just describing these disciples scrabbling over each other, trying to get out of the boat, trying to get away from them, climbing up and raising this clamor and this clatter. It's kind of the terror, not of a scary movie, not of that shock moment in Jaws when you see a boat at the bottom of the ocean. It's not the terror of a haunted house or a haunted corn maze or something like that. It's not even the terror of I'm in the dark and there's nobody here and I don't know what to do. But it's the terror of this could end things. It's the terror that maybe your dad had when all of a sudden, they were driving and you see him turn the radio off because he needs to be able to see. And you see him grip the steering wheel a little bit tighter with white-knuckled hands. And you see him maybe adjust his glasses so that he can see exactly how to maneuver a suddenly treacherous situation. It's the terror of, oh my goodness, we need to run to the emergency room, but I don't know if we're going to make it. That sort of terror. They cry out, look out, it's a ghost. Maybe that is the angel of death, and that is proof, the harbinger of death, the one that means we're done for. The sort of terror that not just grips you in the heart and makes the breathing hard, but also gets you in the gut like, this is it, this is real. And there's that word, terror, fear. And I think when we talk about fear, Jesus lets them be, and he drops them into a terrifying situation. And he's ready to just walk on by. He's just having a stroll across the lake. Guys, I'll see you on the other side. I'll see you there tomorrow. He's ready to walk on by, and they are crying out in terror. This isn't the fear of the Lord that Elisha has, where Elisha prays, Lord, open his eyes. This isn't the fear of the Lord that Paul has when he knows that he is going to be concluding his earthly days and continuing his existence in heaven. This isn't the fear of the Lord that says, I don't know how things are going to turn out. This is an abject terror, a heartfelt terror. But there's that phrase, fear. And I think not that necessarily Jesus is preparing you to walk in a world where demons are crying out left and right, and he's not necessarily preparing you to drive them out with the word of the Lord and with prayer, but he is preparing you. He is preparing you to speak He is preparing you to act in a godly way. He is preparing you to say, you know what, maybe this Christian faith means more about receiving the gifts of God and then applying that in a daily discipline. And that's where the Christian faith really, the rubber meets the road. And that's what the Christian faith is all about. Fear. Even though Jesus hasn't dropped you into, at least not right now to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't dropped you into a terrifying, gut-wrenching situation where all of a sudden you're confronted with the idea of your own mortality, he still wants to cultivate fear within your heart. And I think we do a disservice if we just dismiss the fear of the Lord and we just substitute all these other English synonyms that would fit. Well, we don't mean fear, we don't mean that, we mean like awe. A-W-E, awe. Like it's awe-inspiring. Like the fear of the Lord means you stand in awe of God. Not quite. There are very few things that, even in our everyday or in the course of our lives, that we would stand in awe of. Maybe you see El Capitan in Yosemite, and you stand in awe of that, at least the first time. Awe isn't strong enough. Maybe it's respect. That God doesn't mean like fear of the Lord, like he wants you to be terrified of him and scared of him, but he means like respect. You know, like you had a good father who raised you and he taught you to respect him, and even though it was challenging through the teenage years, you learned that in some ways, in a lot of ways, that he was right, and that you learned to respect him for that. Maybe it's like respect. And you see what we do? When Jesus wants to cultivate an attitude of trust that leads to action, we try to slip right in there and say, well, it's not like that. Try to water down and dilute and divert the law of God to say, well, God invites us to come into his presence. And so I should just be able to enter his presence willy-nilly. And come to the Lord's table. I mean, we've got prayers in the back part of the back cover of your hymnal, that we come into the presence of the Lord's table, and right there is a miracle rivaling or even greater than the miracle of God creating life. That the very Son of God who offered his death on the cross, body and soul, body and blood and soul, is the God who meets his people here. And that we don't come into his presence for worship, much less to his table, to simply receive it as if, well, this is what we do, and, well, it's 10 after, and Pastor got a little bit of a late start today, but maybe it'll be faster next time, and can this go along? If we talk about the fear of the Lord in a way that dismisses its fearfulness, then we'll risk missing out on the lesson that Jesus wants to teach. If we talk about the fear of the Lord, but remove any aspect of terror from it, of fear from it, of realization that I am the created and I am the one who has sinned against holy God, and he, by all rights and in all justice, ought to have turned me into, totally de-atomized me into nothingness. That's the fear of the Lord. And couple that with faith. That the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Understanding that where we stand in relation to God means that I don't make any first effort or any second effort, that all the good that he does is him working through me. That even when the Israelites were gathered at Mount Sinai, and God spoke to them the first time, you remember this, God spoke to them this first time, and they said, all right, that was good, but Moses, why don't you just talk to us next time, because it's really terrifying to have God speak to us. And then even Moses, like the next verse or two later, Moses says, well, I am trembling with fear. Fear. Because he knows the terror of standing before God. That is what Jesus is using. giving and allowing and letting and sending this storm so that they experience a moment of terror, so that they get over their lackadaisical approach to their time with Jesus. And they realize what a gift it really is. They realize the power that their Lord really wields. They realize not only has this powerful God come to be with us, but that he has come to carry your sin and mine. That even though we would be and ought to have been like quavering little Jello figurines before God, just jiggling in terror, that God spoke kindly to you in an external way. He gave his word. And he spoke kindly to you with an external truth. He gave his son. And he continues to speak kindly to you with an external proof. He gives you his body and blood. And he continues to encourage that faith with the external Spirit, who comes through those means, as well as the gospel remembered. He comes through those tools to say, dear Christian, you have nothing to fear. Yes, fear the Lord. Respect and awe and terror. But then, gaze upon the beauty of your Lord Jesus Christ, who considered himself nothing and laid aside the use of his divine power in order to die on the cross, to make you his own. To make you his own, not walking to you on water, but coming to you individually, underneath the bread and underneath the wine. So that each person standing here can say, you know what, I come here in the fear of the Lord, and at the same time I have nothing to be afraid of, because this Jesus has taken it all away. That idea, nothing to be afraid of. That, maybe you haven't caught this, maybe you don't. If you listen to like modern Christian music very much, you'll hear it. Where modern Christian music doesn't think very much of the idea of sin and grace. And as a consequence, they don't think very much of Jesus dying for sinners such as you and me. That the whole purpose of modern Christian music is just repackaged psychology from the 90s that says, you need to become the best person that you can be. You need to achieve your potential. There's a good one. You need to live up to your potential. And you need to get rid of the thing holding you back. And they won't identify that thing holding you back as your sinful flesh. No, that's uncomfortable. But identify it as fear. So what is it that you're afraid of? And Jesus makes you no longer a slave to fear. What is it that you're afraid of? Jesus helps you overcome your fear so that you can be the person he meant you to be. And that's like a shortcut that short-circuits the whole picture. Because you see what Jesus does here in our gospel lesson, that he drops his disciples right into this terrifying situation. He drops his disciples right into this area where even the seasoned fishermen are seasick, and the ones who aren't used to being on the lake are just feeling queasy for all sorts of other reasons. That he drops them into this terrifying situation to bring them to a realization, to let their conscience speak. When all the circumstances of life are unavoidably in their face, the conscience speaks, and they're terrified, not just because they might die, but what that means. What does it mean? If I die, that is proof that I am sinful. If I am sinful, then I will stand before holy God. And Jesus lets that happen. He sends that opportunity so that he can teach them one more time. What does he say? 3 things. Verse 50. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Take courage. It is I. Those two kind of go together because he's not just saying, hey, buck up. Come on. We're almost there. But take courage, it is I. Take courage because I am here. Take courage because I have come to you and I am coming to you. And as a result, do not be afraid. As a result, do not be afraid that you actually have nothing to fear. Not because you had so much potential that you're now living up to. Not because by our own human power we have cleaned up our lives and attained the level of goodness that our neighbors applaud. But rather, have no fear because Jesus has taken away your sin. Have no fear because we've got the external signs and proofs of God's grace toward you. Have no fear because right there is where water falls off the head and the name of God and all of his power is present to create and strengthen faith. Have no fear because you heard the word from your pastor that your sin is forgiven for the sake of Jesus Christ. Have no fear because when you come here, yes, you are in the very presence of God, and you are closer to God right here than even the high priest entering the Holy of Holies. Have no fear because the reason that we come and stand here is because this Jesus has washed you clean. Have no fear, take courage, he says. Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid, because he comes to his people again. Contrast that with all the hype and all the pep about human potential, and all of that just falls flat. It doesn't hold up under pressure. It doesn't provide actual encouragement and help. All of it, that is, every encouragement apart from Christ, is just a numbers game. Like, in all probability, things will get better. If you live long enough, then things will get better. Wrong. Well, you don't have any certainty there. All the other ideas of hype and pep, don't worry, God has a plan for your life. All that is a probability game. You can't say that things will get better this side of heaven. That maybe for you, the fear, the terror, the pain, the hurt might persist for the rest of the 70 or 80 years that God gives you here. But Jesus' words are stronger than your pain. Jesus' resurrection is stronger than your sin. Jesus' promise in the supper is stronger than any sort of guilty conscience, any sort of worry, any sort of doubt, or even terror that the disciples talk about here. Why? Because the one who said, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid, is the one who still says that. The one who says, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid, he says, dear Christian, yes, you ought to have fear, a healthy fear of God. That includes awe, that includes respect, but at its base, it is trembling before God, saying, I have nothing to offer you, and at the same time, you have a Lord who has given you everything. So don't be afraid. At the same time, you have a Lord who has given you everything. So don't get distracted by all the things the world worries about, as if we were Elisha's servant looking around and saying, oh, don't you know what's going to happen? And there's the army, and this is what I'm told I have to worry about on that flickering screen in my living room. Well, turn it off. And listen to Jesus. What does he say? Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Amen.